Welcome to this week's episode of The Gateway, your compass to through the magical waters of spirit communication, broadcast live from Public United Radio Network 107.7 FM New Orleans. I'm your host, CL Thomas. If you guys remember from last week that I was talking, I was in Seattle, I was talking with Michelle DeRochers about the representation of reptilians and the features that are found in petroglyphs and ancient statues across the world. You would never believe what I came across last week. So while I was going through Seattle, I took a ferry over to Bainesbridge Island, and look at this. Let me pull this picture up. You see this image? Now, if you look closely at the very back, at that second image, and I can't even believe that I was looking at this. The second image is a feature of half human and half reptilian. And it was in the museum, of course, and it's from I'm probably going to say it wrong, the Squamish people. It was Native Americans that used to live in the Seattle area. And this representation is supposed to be the different faces of the ancient Squamish people that helped them tame the lands. That's what they had on their board. So I just wanted to show you guys, put that out there, how neat this really is. We were just talking about that on the show. And the next day I took a ferry out and found myself in a museum learning about the natives. And I couldn't even believe this was before me. So I just wanted to show that to you. Tonight's guest is a very special friend of mine. He's actually got a trilogy called the Ghost Crime series. It's Gare Allen. So let me pull this down. I'm going to pull him up. Hey, Gare, welcome to the show.
Hi, CL. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you? It's been a while.
I'm doing well. Down here in Florida, awaiting the next storm, sadly. Tis the season.
Vegas is it was so nice in Seattle. It was actually really cold. And then I came back to Las Vegas, and of course it's like 110 degrees.
Yeah, I think we're supposed to drop to 91 next Wednesday, and everyone's saying bundle up, and we're making a big joke about it because it'll drop 6 or 7 degrees next for some reason. I don't know what kind of front's coming through, but we get a 6 to 7 degree reprieve, so we're looking forward to that.
It'll be a 6 to 7 degree drop in Florida, but it'll be 90% humidity.
It's so funny. People say it's not the heat, it's humidity. I assure you, it's both. I
It's
assure
a, hey, I lived in the South for quite a long time. I know this.
Yes.
So, Gary, we talked before, and then you had two books about ghost crimes, and they're just so interesting because when you take it from the side of policemen and first responders, and I had another gentleman on recently who spoke from the side of a fireman first responder. They're really not too open about the paranormal field.
They're not. And when I first started to write Ghost Crimes, it was going to be a compilation. It was just going to be this firefighter had this experience, and this EMT had this experience. And when I uncovered the same thing like you just said, it's like they were like, yeah, I'll tell you about it, but don't use my name. I don't really want to. And they're almost hesitant to bring it up because it's not always a very positive experience. It's confusing. It can be scary. A lot of times it goes against their faith. In some cases they felt like something had followed them home, and they felt like their family was threatened. So there was a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm like, I need to relay the effect, not just the, fun, cool paranormal story of what happened, but the effect it had on those involved, including those first responders. And so that put me in a different direction. Instead of doing a compilation, I said, well, let me put real characters in there and have them experience those things that happen, and narrate that through the story. And that's what I did. And I made the main character, Detective Burke, a very reluctant experiencer of it. He didn't really believe in it, but these things were happening. And I thought that would really give it a lot of weight, that he wasn't out there investigating by any means and saying, check this out. He was actually struggling to reconcile what was happening in his professional life.
That your books are just so interesting. So I have to ask, each one seems to have a different theme. So this last one you just came out with, it's more about um, reincarnation. So what is the themes from book 1 and 2?
So book one it spans about 20 years, and it's Detective Burke, unfortunately having tragedy early in his life, and then going through 20 years of experiences. He teams up with another detective and just sort of comes to the realization after 20 years that these things are out there, these dark forces are out there, and they're both human and they're both paranormal. And that's kind of where the title came from, is his detective partner at first doesn't really have the paranormal experiences. He just has the experiences of the human. And so when the detective Burt tries to say, "Hey, there's other supernatural forces here," he says, "Ghosts don't kill people. People kill people. These aren't ghost crimes." And that's kind of where that title came from. And in the second book, and so every story in that first book was from my compilation. I weave them into the story, and that was actually based on a lot of actual cases that were told to me. So in the second book, I just took them off and said, "Okay, the paranormal enemy." And I wanted something really sinister. I wanted them to go through something really dark. Detectives, and I actually teamed up one of the victims who survived from the first book. And so they sort of banded together now, and they're all on a mission to fight the paranormal for their own personal reasons. But they're together as this unlikely team in a way. Um, and what I did was I still had a lot of stories left over, a lot of one-offs, if you will. And I said, I have to get these in there because they're amazing stories. And so I created a support group for nurses and first responders and all these folks to come and share their paranormal experience that they were struggling to reconcile in their mind and their heart. And it was a safe space for them to come to these weekly meetings and say, "This is what happened to me." And everybody listened with reverence, but it was a way for me to get those one-offs in there as just enjoyable and often scary paranormal stories. And it worked. The readers said it worked, so I'm not patting myself on the back, but it worked with the storyline.
So does the main characters kind of travel through each book? Like
Yeah,
does
so I kept
one get into the third?
I kept the three main characters: Detective Burke, who's older, Detective Garrison, who's younger, and then Lisa, who was the friend of a victim from the first book. And so, and her and Garrison are sort of having a light relationship together. In book three, I always wanted to have a character that sort of had an edge to him. I have a pretty dark sense of humor at times, and I can be a little cutty and edgy at times. And I wanted a character where I could really just put myself in the book somehow without putting myself in the book. And so I gave Detective Burke an annoying brother, and I put him in the book and teamed him up with Lisa. And I thought it worked well. There were mixed reviews, but he had his place, and he did well by the end of the book. So that was fun to put myself in there.
Does your character kind of die off, or does he make it to the fourth book?
Oh no, they're all, and that's part of the characters, is they're driven by the need to protect because they understand the paranormal from their lens and they understand what it can do. And so when someone says, "I have a haunting," they take that seriously. They go into the house, and it's not just to get readings. It's to banish or help those spirits cross over. There's a mission attached to it. But in book three, an unholy trinity, I take them back in time a little bit, and it's very, there's a lot of old souls there and a lot of angry spirits, and they're all intertwined, and it's difficult and it's tough, and every time they experience the paranormal, their own fears resurface from what they've experienced during life. So they work together, and but it's a labor of love for sure.
So when you got together this group, how did you go about doing that? And how did you get people to talk about this that are nurses and first responders?
So I wasn't able to get a group together. I did a posting out on my social media. I did a posting on my website. And what happened was I would say, "Great, thank you for submitting the story." And then it was always very short, right? "This happened, I was here and I saw this and that happened." And I'm like, "Can I ask a few more questions? Can I
It's
ask a
kind of
few
like
more
they're
questions?"
writing an incident report, right?
Exactly. I didn't know what I didn't know because I had never really put a compilation book together like that before. But I needed more meat, and so And then, do you know anybody else that had an experience? Would you mind giving them this email or this phone number to text me? And then little by little, I got more and more. Which is interesting. Is I do know some policemen, and I do know some first responders and nurses, and they told me some stories over the years. So I kind of pulled on those as well. But I reached out to them to see if there was anything else to it. But a lot of them are just these things happen. Like I said, there are some cases where something followed them home, and there was threatened to the family, and it became a thing, and they just and there was actually a fear that even talking about it might bring it back or have it happen again. So I had to be very respectful of that. Yeah.
It's interesting when you talk to people who've been affected by the paranormal. A lot of them say that they're afraid to even bring up what happened because they're afraid of inviting that entity back into their lives. For instance, my friend says he had an experience with Skinwalker, or he's afraid. He got scratched on his back deck one time after we went to a ghost town, and it was a very frightful thing for him. But now he won't even mention the name Skinwalker. We have to say it that shall not be named, or something silly
Yeah.
like that. But he's so afraid of just talking about it would invite this entity back into his life somehow. Could that really happen, you think?
And I studied metaphysics for many, many years, and I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole here of energy, but my belief and the things I've read, and of course, all the channeled information out there, you read a lot about reality creation, everything's energy, and, we're energy, and everything's energy around us, and our thoughts, manifest and create the things in our lives. And the key to that is you can create anything you want with your thoughts and your intentions if you have enough emotion behind it, right? So it's like, okay, but we're all like, win the lotto. We're not really excited. We're not passionate about the lotto. We just want money, right? But there's no love attached to money. You can't really generate like a genuine passion or drive for that. But if you're fearful of something, that comes from deep within you. That's real and that's strong, right? So it's no different. So when you love something, and you have a moment where you really feel love for something, it's real. It's inside you, and it's not something you can really control. It's just something you feel, kind of thing. But I think it emanates out there, and I think it's no different with fear. So having said that, if you fear something and you talk about a skinwalker, and it brings back that horrible day where you got scratched by one, and then you put that fear out there, energy wise, why wouldn't they be attracted to it? Why wouldn't they connect to that? I don't know. Maybe. There's that thought that they operate on a different plane where I don't know. And then the fact that they can come to us and we dream about them, people have nightmares about things like that. It's like they can get to us on that astral plane, which is where the dream state is. I mean, those are the beliefs. And I don't think it's an untruth. I can't tell you that it's 100% truth, but it's like, but to your friend's point, it's like, why take the chance? Just don't say the name. Right?
Very true. Yeah, he's a good friend of mine. So we always talk about this stuff. But back to your books, I forget where I was even going with that. How do you take these true stories and make a novel out of them? They're not historical fiction, but they're still true, even though they're fictionalized.
Yeah. So I mean, with the first book, kept the stories like to the letter of what they told me. And I was able to connect them, and some of them happened to me as I was growing up, so I was able to remember the specifics and tie them together. I took a little liberties in the very last chapter because there has to be that, you have to wrap it up, and all the ends have to be tied up, or everybody's going to complain, right? So I did take some liberties at the end, but the actual events, the murders and the attacks and the hauntings and the people that were involved in the arrests, all those were things that were told to me. So. And I got as much detail as I could, but in the second and third book, I took stories, but I really had to take some liberties to keep the narrative together. I just had to. There was no way around it. So I don't say, these are true stories. And the first one was based on actual cases told to me, but I did one interview. I'm trying to remember who it was, but he asked me, how did I vet the stories from the first responders? And I said, I don't know about you, but I'm willing to just give them the benefit of the doubt that what they told me is what happened. And why wouldn't I believe them? We all have a ghost story, right? Or two or more that we have out of our lives. And why would there's no, and how do you vet a ghost story, by the way?
You
how,
can't,
how do you
right?
prove that you saw a ghost? It's like, I really didn't understand the question. I had actually had to repeat it. I think you thought I didn't know what vet means. I'm like, no, that's not what I mean. I don't understand how I would vet something. And I'm going to give these amazing people who leave their house in the morning and they say they're going to put their lives on the line and their safety on the line for strangers, and their families wait until they come home safe at the end of the day so they can exhale. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that if they chose to share a story that was not a positive experience in their life, that they're telling me the truth. Nobody asked for credit or money or anything like that. It was just a matter of, hey, this happened. And some of them were like, what do you think? And I was like, I'm not, I'm not the ghost whisperer. But I've had experiences, so I can share what happened to me. Maybe it's similar, or just really how to reconcile it, or maybe even tuck it away as something.
I think out of
Just,
everybody out there.
Of that.
Hey, Gary, you still here? You faded out.
Yep, I'm here.
I think a lot of people out there who are into the paranormal and who read books like yours and these TV shows and things of that nature, I think they tend to forget that ghosts just aren't found in these paranormal abandoned buildings and things that we see on TV. And when you have that, like you said earlier, when you have that kind of emotion and fear that's going on, it can generate any kind of energy. If you think about somebody that maybe they were in a car wreck and are just hanging on to life, of course their loved ones are going to come around and visit them. Of course you're going to have a lot of paranormal activity around that particular person. How can there not be?
Yeah, I had an experience that was just beyond moving. And you talk to people and even people who just have a strong faith, and you say, well, how do you know, God is real? And they'll tell you their story. They'll tell you their God story, their Jesus story, whatever their experience was. And it is as real as the fingers on their hand to them, because they know. And so when you have a paranormal experience, it's not dissimilar. You have an experience, it resonates, it vibrates through you, and you have eyes, you have senses, that experience it. But when my mother passed away, it was devastating, and unfortunately, it was in my home. Unfortunately, I found her, and it was just this very traumatic thing for me. And I had dreams for a year. For a year, I had dreams about my mother. And a year later, I remember I was just really trying to figure it all out. And I was talking to a friend at the gym. I was losing my mind anyway. He listened to me patiently. So I get home and I let the dogs out, and there's like no radio, no TV. The house is completely silent. And so I took my phone and I hit voice dictation, because I was going to say, hey, thanks for listening. Sorry, I went off on you after the gym or whatever. And I hit the button for voice dictation, and immediately it turned off as fast as I hit it. It sort of went beep beep. But when I went to hit it again, it had actually recorded 2 words, and it was "Mom, good." And it told me that I was worried about my mother on the other side. I was like, did she pass over? What happened? Because I don't know. I hope she passed over, but the dreams were like getting in my head. And that was my message, that she was good. And it was just, and no one will ever tell me that was not what that was, right? That's my truth. That's what happened.
Have any of these stories that were told to you by these first responders, have any of them really stood out to you and changed the way you view the paranormal?
Yeah, there was one, and it's funny because a lot of the stories are like variations of other stories. You hear about, a policeman pulls up and there's somebody on the side of the road and they're waving him down. They're like, hey, there's an accident right up here. The car fell down here. There's a woman and a baby there, whatever, and so the policeman runs down there only to find that the person in the car was the one that waved them down. So I heard that story a lot. Variations of that, accidents and things like that, where the person that had passed was the one that brought them to their body, or to save the child that was in the car that was still alive, kind of thing. But the one that really, and I was on Dave Schrader's show, and he was talking about this. He had a friend in, I think it might have been Nevada, actually, where they had responded to a call. But I got a similar story where someone showed up to a home. The mother called and said, they're trying to kill my son. They're trying to kill my son, and they just assume it's somebody else in the house is trying to hurt the child. So they get there and they go into the bedroom and they're watching this young boy literally being thrown from wall to wall by an unseen force.
Wow. Was it like an exorcism kind of thing?
Yeah, like there was some unseen force just throwing this poor child, and he's hitting the wall, he's hitting the other wall, he's going back and forth against the walls, and limbs are being broken, and so they're starting to dangle, and the child's almost passed out, and the mother's screaming, she's, holding up a cross, doing everything she can to kind of stop it. And those are the ones that sort of scare me, because I'm like, okay, for the most part, I've had, I have ghosts, they do parlor tricks. That's what I call them. They throw something on the floor. They drain the battery in the remote. I'm like, ooh, scary. But, I'm like, I'm kind of glad I get those ghosts, so I don't have any that are like, tossing me about the house kind of thing. So I wonder about that. And I wonder about the level of energy that it takes to do that. And I also wonder the intent and where did that come from? And so you read about voodoo or santeria or things like that, where, my understanding is people can actually conjure or invoke things to bring them in to do things like that. And you wonder about that. And it's like, if someone has the ability to open a doorway to let something in like that would cause that kind of harm, to me, that's terrifying. That's something, how do you defend against that? You can't. And you hear about it every now and then, but what if that becomes the norm and the parlor trick ghosts become, the not happening very often. So that concerns me.
That is really concerning. I have one story like that, and it wasn't with me. It was I have a friend who is a hospice nurse, and she went out. What she does is she goes out and she takes care of people on hospice until they pass away, basically. And there's a whole team. There's a physician and a couple of other nurses, and they just go around the clock to make the person most comfortable. They had this one particular case where this lady, she said the nurse right before her, they were kind of switching off. She had the late shift, she had the third shift, and this other person had second shift. And right before she got there, she said she looked at this woman who, she was doing all that laboring breathing. Toward the end, they do all that raspy breathing and things like that. She was in that state. So the woman was pretty much unconscious, wasn't responding to anyone, getting ready to pass away, basically. And the nurse looked at her, and she said that this woman had turned her head in the bed, and her eyes were just big and black. And she said she had never seen anything like that. It was like the person in her just disappeared and something else was peering out at her. And this woman hasn't moved for like a couple of days, and was just unresponsive, and she was just able to move her head like that. She said she was so scared that she wouldn't go back to that room. And then my friend, who was the third shift hospice nurse, had to stay there because none of the other nurses would go in there. What do you think that was?
I guess my understanding is we don't, and the soul doesn't inhabit your body at birth. It's too traumatic. It waits a little time, and then it enters the baby. And I think it's the same when you die. I don't think you go through the trauma of death. I think that would just be way too much for the soul. So before you leave, whether you know what's going to happen or, right before, an accident happens, I believe the soul leaves. And if that happens at the end, then you're sort of a vessel, I guess, for anything to come in. And, so if you're something that's lingering around a hospital and, you miss being physical, you could jump in that empty shell for a minute before it passes away. And, dark eyes would suggest it wasn't a positive thing that was hanging around the hospital. Yeah. So that's concerning. I had a colonoscopy a couple of years because I'm old. And when I came out of the surgery, I was waking up on the table. I don't know did I tell you this story last time I was on your show? Okay. So I wake up and there's this gorgeous young nurse next to me, and she's shaking my hand and she's like, "Gare, it's time to wake up." And so I kind of wake up and I look at her and I'm like, good Lord, she was just gorgeous and very young. And there was another nurse at the end, and she had one of those wheeling stations with a laptop, and she was punching in information. And I said something like, "Oh, hi," and the nurse kind of turned and looked at me from the station and like, "Hello," and I was like, "Anyway." So the girl said, "Okay, Stephanie's going to take care of you. I just wanted to wake you up," and I said, "Thanks," and she walked off. And then Stephanie turned around and came up, and then I saw her name tag. And I said, "Wow." I said, "She's gorgeous, just a very young, gorgeous nurse." And she goes, "Who?" And I said, "That nurse was right there." And she's like, "There's no nurse here." And I was like, "Oh, come on." You're kidding me. Because I felt her arm shaking my arm. And I'm like, okay. And of course, I told my family, and they're like, "Of course you saw ghosts." I'm like, no. You don't understand. She knew the nurse's name at the end. I didn't know this nurse. How did my hallucination know the name of the nurse that was about to walk over, right? So I'm like debunking it. But yeah, so that was pretty cool.
Was this like some kind of paranormal nurse? What was she? I don't know. Like, did she die there or something?
I don't know. Like I said, it's funny because I thought about it. I'm like, okay, I wasn't scared. It was a colonoscopy. I was like, whatever. I was out. I don't remember anything from being out. I didn't have like an out of body experience or anything. I don't know. I don't know why she woke me up. And like I said, the only thing remarkable about it was she was stunning. Absolutely stunning. I was like, good. And I just remember thinking that, oh my God, this is just a stunning woman. And that's it. So I have no idea. I have no idea what happened, but it brought me pleasure. So I had to come out of it and be, oh, hey.
Well, with these ghost attachments like that, okay, so if you, your theory makes complete sense that you would leave your body right before you pass away. And I've watched someone pass away before. It was a really good friend of mine, and he was not there. I'm convinced he wasn't there the last couple of days. So at some point, you're right. They go away somewhere. They just move on, I guess. And what you're left with is the body struggling to stay alive, basically. How is there a way to like keep attachments from getting connected to that person or that empty shell? And can that attachment transfer onto the loved ones that are there taking care of that person?
The way I look at that is, and I've had a lot of experiences over the years. The house I live in now we moved in 1999, and it was haunted when we moved in. So we had all kinds of weird things happen. But I have noticed that over the years, if I go to a certain place, I'll bring home something, and something will be in the house, and there's an attachment. So the way I look at it is, it's sort of like if you create a hospitable environment for them, then you'll draw in that type of spirit. So it's sort of like if you leave dirty dishes in the sink for 3 days, you're going to have bugs, right? But if you keep it nice and clean, the bugs aren't attracted. They're not going to show up, kind of thing. And so I think the energy, the mood, that in your house, if you live in a negative relationship and there's, drug addiction and fights and things like that, that's hospitable for negative energies to come in. And my understanding is when you are consuming alcohol or taking drugs, it lowers your energy vibration and allows them in, but they also feed off that negativity. So you're sort of giving them what they want in that respect. So if you maintain a positive house, a positive environment, and I think it's more energy. So people will say, we'll put salt around the house and holy water, which I do, just for the sake of covering all the bases. But I think it's more your perspective and your attitude and your state of being. Are you in a positive place? Are you a happy person? Are you super down and negative, and allowing those things to come in? So I think you just attract it. And this kind of goes back to what your friend said, if you talk about skinwalkers, is the fear what's attracting them, right? You're putting out something they are attracted to, kind of thing. I don't know. So that's kind of how I look at that. I always wonder, I'm like, okay, I keep a positive house and everything, but every now and then something will follow me home. And I'm like, why are you here? And what are you doing here? Did you just want to mess with me? Did you know that I would see you and I believe in it? So, go to the ghost writer's house. I don't know, why are you here? But again, I always wonder, I'm like, I don't know what you want from me, kind of thing. Cause it's never egregious. It's like I said, draining of batteries. I remember one time I was walking into the bathroom and the towel flew across the bathroom, from one side to the other. And I said, oh, Well done. I
Nice
don't, I
parlor
don't,
trick.
exactly. I'm like, pick up a mop if you really want to impress me. You know, you can pick up a towel, pick up a
Yeah,
mop, help me
let's
clean the
clean the
house.
house up, or
Yeah.
pick
So
up the
I
dog.
wonder about that. But I will tell you, if I go to, there's a Hard Rock casino here. I go probably twice a year for holidays when my brother comes in town. And I can guarantee you when I get back from that casino in the next day or two, there will be activity. And I
Just from the
just think,
casino?
yeah, I think it's because, again, addiction, there's a lot of alcohol consumption. I think there's some, and I've seen people there that, we're not in a good frame of mind, and, maybe spending their life savings or losing it in that
Yeah.
moment. And I just think there's, and that's the same thing for bars. I mean, it's not just, I'm not saying casinos are bad, but I think you have those individuals in those state of mind. And I think that's, well, why they follow me home, I have no idea, but it's happened quite a bit over the years.
So what do you think of Vegas? That's where I live with all the.
I absolutely. I've been to Vegas 7 times. I've been there on New Year's Eve 4 times, and it was always amazing. I went to all. I do all the touristy thing. I'm so Florida that way. I want to do all the, Ramsey restaurants, and I want to go see 2 shows every time I'm there at least, and I get the comedy club dinner coupon. I do all that crazy stuff, and just I have a blast. I think it's an exercise and excessive behavior that everyone should experience. I've always had a blast there, and I think after 3 days I'm like, I need to leave. So I
Yeah.
could not live there. I that was it. This would be a posthumous conversation if I lived there, because I wouldn't make it. So because I could just hit the slots every day, I could eat at the buffets every day, I could do that every day. But I'm
Well,
glad I don't. But
I have a
I
little
miss it.
secret for you. I have a little secret for you. So first of all, those of us that live in Vegas, we have our little neighborhood casinos that has the restaurants and all of that kind of stuff in it. Most of us really don't go to the strip for anything. We really don't gamble. We might go to the casino just to see a show or, to eat. But we're not down there every day playing slots or anything like. I don't know anybody that does that.
Okay. I guess because it's something I can't really do here. I mean, like I said, we have the Hard Rock, but I guess it's the same. People say, "Oh, you live in Tampa. I'm an hour from Orlando. Do you go to Disney every week?" And I'm like, I haven't been to Disney. And
Exactly. It's exactly the same thing. It's when I lived in Nashville too, it was the same thing. I never went down to Second Avenue to go to go honky tonking. That's what they call it.
is that Broadway? Is that the
Yeah.
same?
Yep.
Oh my!
Second Avenue and Broadway.
I loved going from bar to bar. I did the touristy thing. I went from bar to bar, and I just had a blast. I love Nashville. Um, yeah, I'm like your quintessential tourist, I guess. I don't.
I mean, I'll do it when I have friends in town, but I have to say though, back on point, there are a lot of hauntings and stuff around Las Vegas, believe it or not. There really is. There's a lot of reports about haunted homes around here. I have a friend that does home cleansings. She's busy all the time helping
You
people with.
know, and in my house there was, the previous owner committed suicide in the home, and he was also practicing some sort of magic. I don't know what. There was chicken feed and, very voodoo kind of looking things, but I'm not sure what it was. But I just, and this is what I did for Ghost Crimes 3, was I went back to traumatic events that happened in the early 1900s, and the residual from that on a couple of different levels. And we forget the atrocities of the past. People say, "Oh, I can't believe we did that." And it's like, it happened less than 100 years ago. Okay, so don't act like it was like ancient history. I mean, this stuff like just happened. And I focused on the prison slave labor that was very prevalent. And prisoners were just sent out to farms, and they were slave labor, and farmers didn't have to pay them. And if they passed out in the Florida sun and died, they were just no longer on any kind of records, and they were gone. And things like that happened. And so I kind of tied that in to show some of that. And yeah, but in doing the research, I'm like, that didn't happen, and it did. And it's kind of scary. And as you know, as a writer, we learn a little bit about a lot of things, right?
Mhm.
We kind of do enough to kind of get the character where he needs to be, but then we go down a rabbit hole sometime. We're like, wait a minute,
Yeah,
what else is going on here?
you're absolutely. Yeah, I'm writing about she was a prostitute back in 1906, and I've learned way more about gold mining and prostitution than I ever thought I would learn in my entire life. To your
Yeah,
point,
yeah.
um,
I don't enjoy that, but
with this book, Reincarnation, what kind of stories? So you got the prison story in there, but what do you mean by reincarnation? What happens if that's the theme of the book?
so, and that's my next book. So what I'm doing is I'm actually going to do an actual compilation book of reincarnation stories. And so reincarnation is a common theme throughout my books, because I had when I started studying metaphysics back in the early '90s. I was obsessed with it, and I had regressions done. I did my own regressions at home with my, with well, back then it was cassette tapes, but we'll say CDs for the sake of my age. But and I actually would go back and experience these lives, and they were so real, and they had connections to my current life, and I just found it so interesting, and I didn't see a difference between someone as a young child, almost drowning in the swimming pool, and later becoming an adult who hates the water. I didn't see a difference between them. To me, it was like, that makes perfect sense. So if in the last life I was in a wheelchair, for 11 years, and I was alone, and all the lives I connected to, I was no famous person, I assure you. They were very dreary and sad lives, but they totally, connected to who I was today. So I connected to this life where I was in a wheelchair for the last, 11 or 13 years, I forget now, and I was by myself, and I had a motorcycle accident and become paralyzed from it. And my girlfriend at the time was on the back, and she died during that accident. And I didn't realize it, but she was carrying our unborn child as well. And so I spent the next, 11 or 13 years living in our apartment, and with her cat was still there most of the time, which was just a daily reminder. It was just this horrible, horrible, end of life. But anyway, when I was younger, I couldn't sleep with pajama bottoms or blankets or sheets on my legs. I would get claustrophobic, and I didn't have like restless leg or anything. I would freak out if I'd wake up and the covers, like my parents would come in the middle of the night and put the covers on me. I had to throw them off, and I would just scream and panic about them. And when I connected to that life after being in the wheelchair, it went away. It was completely gone. And it was only after the fact that I made the connection. I was like, yeah, that's interesting. But I mean, as an adult, like I said, I wouldn't sleep with the covers. It was weird. I'd freeze all night long because I couldn't put the covers on. But yeah, so that life kind of connected, and I was like, oh. And then I tapped in, went back and had more lives where everyone I was alone. I was in some sort of sad state and alone. And it's interesting because I struggled over the years going to trade shows and conventions. Now, put me on a stage and I would came alive because I was in control of it, right? I had no problem being up there doing that. But once I got down with the crowds, I would actually skip events and go to my hotel room to get away. And I never understood it. I just thought I was being, I didn't even think why I was doing it. I just knew I was uncomfortable and I had to get away. I had to be by myself. And I've never felt lonely, but I love being alone. I love having the house to myself and just doing my thing. And I think that connected to those lives. And so I'm kind of working through that now. So I think the reason for writing the book is to gather stories from other people who had this similar situation. I had this life where I was this, or I dreamt about this life where I had a regression, and it helped me in this way in this life. And what's wrong with that? It's no different than me saying, hey, I had my phone recorded Mom Good. I'm telling you it was my mother. Even if it wasn't, it made me feel better about the situation. So what's the harm in that, right? So that's
Right.
kind of how I look at that. It's like, if something can help you get past a phobia or just make life a little more comfortable, what's the harm in that, right?
Well, similarly, do you have to kind of have all of your emotions and problems in life completely solved before we pass on so we don't have to keep reincarnating?
No, it's funny. I had an idea for a book, and the title was "Life is Supposed to Suck." That's what I was going to call it, because to your point, it's like, we come here, there's all this craziness that happens, right? But are we supposed to overcome every single thing? I don't think that's possible. I think it's more again, there's so much channeled information out there, right? I mean, just so many people channeling so many entities. I had an experience in the early 90s where somebody channeled their spirit guide, and I learned all kinds of craziness from their perspective. And, the whole reason for the experience is if you're on the other side and you're just this amazing, loving entity and you just exist and there are no problems, everything's great, but you come here and you experience other things, it makes you have a better understanding of the good stuff, right? So as you go through something bad, you have a bad relationship, it makes you appreciate the good relationship you have later even more. So there's a benefit to that negativity or that bad experience or whatever it is we're experiencing. So I'm like, oh, okay, it's supposed to be bad because you're going to appreciate it, whether it's later in this life or when you cross back over and you have a better understanding of what it is you're experiencing. That's my understanding. Some hard lessons, I'll tell you that. It's like, so.
What happens though if you're somebody who, I don't know, maybe they're just a bad person, like they're a murderer or something like that, and they just never move past that phase to raise their vibrations? They just keep returning as a murderer?
My understanding is when you pass over, you have an amazing perspective now. You see it, you go 10,000 feet up, right? And you see what you did from the perspective of, oh crap, that wasn't nice of me. I probably shouldn't have done that. And so maybe you come back in the next life and you get murdered to understand what you did to those people. And that's kind of a simple explanation. Okay, well, then everybody's like, well, the person that murdered them is bad. It's like, no, they came back here to get murdered because they had to learn a lesson from when they were a murderer. And I'm like, well, good Lord, when does it stop? It's just a cycle of people killing each other to learn it. But it's like, that's what I'm talking about. That's what this place is. That's what Earth is. And these it's interesting when you listen to the channeled information. What was her name? Dolores. I can't think of her last name. You know what I'm talking? Cannon. Dolores Cannon. She talks a lot about life as a school. That is her theme. Life is a school. Life is a school. And here, things are supposed to happen like that because it gives you the perspective. And, you're just supposed to look at what happened and say, okay. And then, who is it? Daryl Anka channels Bashar. And he says it's not what happened, it's your reaction to it. So if you don't like what happened, react the right way so that it doesn't happen again. He's all about ownership. So Dolores talks about us going through, this, horrible grade school of horrors, that we have to experience. And then Daryl's like, as Bashar is saying, no, it's your reaction to it. And you can create your own reality. You can shift your focus to another reality where it's not happening. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's like, okay. So
I really like Cannon. I love her writings. I've read several books by her now, and there's one part where she talks about that woven. I forget what it is. It's like some kind of wall covering that is woven with these golden threads and everything. And every time she has an experience or a connection with a past life, that thread within that woven picture lights up. It's a really cool idea that I really liked.
And I guess, it's easy for me to say, okay, I should, just because I had a bunch of lives where I liked being alone, I should use this life to like being around people. And I'm like, no. Still don't like being around a ton of people. It's not who loves crowds anyway, it's like, or some people just say, well, I don't like crowds, but they don't bother me, whatever, but I kind of focus on the important stuff now. So I'm at the point now where I'm at the age where I'm reflective. There's a lot less road ahead of me than there is behind me. I'm looking in the rear view and I'm judging my reaction and my decisions and those sorts of things. And, but moreover, it's about, okay, let's just focus on now. It's not the past, it's not the future, it's now. And that's tough because again, I don't know how much longer I have. And, if it's only 5 years, then that would totally change how I'm going to live the rest of my life. But if I have, 20 years, well, I got to be responsible, Gare, and keep things moving and, pay the bills. So You know, it's yeah, we're not set up for the easy route. That's for sure in this
Right,
situation.
right. So with reincarnation, is there how does that work when you have spirits who don't seem to be reincarnated? They seem to be haunting everything.
From the channeled information that I've heard, it's like they're stuck or they've chosen to stay in between for whatever reason. Sometimes they stay behind because they feel they need to take care of their family, right? They need to oversee them, or they feel guilty, or they cross over and they don't. It's so traumatic, or they go in denial. They don't realize they're dead, or they don't believe they're dead. And I think that's what happened here with the individual who shot himself. Is he would only. It was interesting. He wouldn't only, but his antics were like tenfold when we did house changes to the house. If we painted, if we changed the tile to carpet, if anything we did to change the house, that's when activity would go through the roof. Like he did not like that we were changing his house. And I thought, well, he doesn't realize it's not his house anymore, right? He's wondering why we're
Right.
here, kind of thing, because it was such a traumatic experience to take his own life that he was just stuck there, or he didn't believe it. I don't know. I don't. I think that's sometimes the case, and I think they finally realize at some point, or their guides are trying to get to them that, hey, you know, it's time to move on. And that's something I focus on heavily in ghost crimes. Is Lisa, you know, she wants to, you know, cleanse the house, but she's trying to move them on. Some of them are there are trying to get attention, which is perceived as a haunting, but they're just really trying to get the attention because they're scared and they're lonely and they don't understand why nobody can hear them. So they help them kind of say, hey, turn around, find the light. There's got to be a light somewhere. Ask for your guides. Ask, you know, open up to them. And she goes through, and I learned that from Joni Mayhem, my author friend, and she writes a lot about that too. And Johnny, she's actually a sensitive and she's a clairaudient. She hears them in her ears, and she will go to, she'll do investigations, and she'll say, hey, you need to cross over. You know, there's no reason for you to be here. You know, you need to go to the next step. And I think there's a couple of different reasons why they hover, but my understanding is the longer they stay there, if they are angry about being there, then that anger will grow and they take the energy of the other folks that are in between and they grow as a result. And I think my theory is that what creates what we would call maybe a demon or a poltergeist or something very, very strong and menacing to us. That's my theory on that.
That's a really good theory because the whole demonic idea was there way before Christianity even came about. When you look at it from a historical side, and every single culture has a negative entity like that, whether it be a fae, a yin, you name it. There's some kind of entity like that in every single culture, just about.
Yeah, and it's no different. It's funny if you just look at the parallels between, you know, our plane of existence, for lack of a better term, and the plane of existence we'll call it the astral plane, where there are ghosts. If you look, if you were looking objectively at the planet Earth and you see people and you see the people that commit atrocities, from there are demons, right? There are human demons. And so there's no different on the ghost side. You have the ghosts and you have those that become there's those horrible things, but there's also the thought process that demons, you know, could be aliens, which is a whole nother, you know, arena to get it.
That's a whole that's a whole entire rabbit hole.
Yeah, exactly. That's a deep one too.
I've been talking a lot about aliens lately with different guests. My guest from last week said that a lot of, and it's true, you can find like the reptilian images in old petroglyphs and pyramids and all kinds of different things. And the minute I hung up on that show, I was in Seattle when that last week when that show was aired. I took a ferry to a museum the very next morning, and lo and behold, there was an image of the faces that were supposed to be a part of the Native American tribes that lived around that area. And one of them, sure enough, looks like a reptilian. It's just really interesting.
There was a great meme. It was a dinosaur skeleton that they had dug up, and it had a flying saucer in its mouth. And it just said, nobody's ready for this conversation.
Yeah, there's so many overlaps in the paranormal field. I think everything does come together at some point. We'll never know until after we pass, of course.
Yeah,
But
and to me, it's like I focus on like I can experience I can have regressions and hypnosis and reincarnation stories and experiences that affect my life now, and so there are things that I can experience that I focus on. But as far as aliens, I'm sort of like, you know, it's like they're gonna do what they're gonna do. There's not a whole lot we can really do. It's like if they show up, they show up. If they don't, they don't. But they're gonna do what they're gonna do. I doubt we can really have any say so and how it unfolds once they do show up. So I'm just sort of like, we'll see how that. And I believe they're there, and there's all these theories, and involvement. They're already here, and the whole nine yards. But they're not. I have a lot going on without that being part of my
yeah,
life.
exactly. So, what about dogs? Do dogs reincarnate?
What's funny is it's funny. I was just listening to the Audible of the dog book that I told you I put on Audible, and basically it was just my experience with dogs the first half of my life. And I had a black lab Rottweiler mix, and he passed away. And about a year later, a good friend of mine, called me. She said, "Hey, I got a Rottweiler. I loved your dog's name, Sobek. Can I name my dog Sobek?" And it was so sweet of her to ask. And my dog was half Rottweiler, and I said, "Oh my God, please name your dog Sobek. That would be amazing. Love that name." And so she calls me like a year or two later, and she's like, "Okay, I gotta tell you something." I'm like, and she had Bouviers before that, like all these Bouviers. She had gone to a pet psychic, and she said, "I went to a pet psychic, and she was amazing. She told me all about the pet Bouviers that I had, and the dogs were all there, and they were saying all my ladies, they were all female. She knew their names, and she was amazing." I'm like, "That's amazing. I'm so happy you connected with your Bouviers." She goes, "Yeah," but then she told me, she just said, "There's this black lab, and he's jumping around and running around, and he keeps saying the same thing over and over." And she's like, "I've never had a lab." And she said, "What's he saying?" He's like, "Tell him I'm okay. Tell him I'm okay." And she just knew it was for me. And she called me and told me. Now, I know that wasn't a whole lot of fact and things that people are really like, okay, whatever. But I was driving and I lost it. I teared up. I was like, "Yeah, that was my boy." So, but I don't know. I mean, I think that I understand the animals. So, one channel session I had, I asked about that, and they said they were extensions of us and our energy. And I thought that was interesting and also terrifying. But there are documented cases, and I've seen it, where the dogs will take on our illnesses, right? And you see that happen where somebody had cancer and the dog gets cancer a year later, and it's just they take those things on. And if that were the case, again, going back to the thought that everything's energy, we share the same energy, so those things would be prevalent there as well. So I don't know. I think for me, and I'm a dog person, of course, but
Of course.
they're the they're the best of what we could be. And all I know is they bring me immense joy, and it's like I wish I could be that unconditional. I wish I could be that happy. I wish I could be that free loving. I wish that, and if that's something we can strive to be, if that's the example that they're bringing to us, I don't know. God nailed it when he made that species. Let me tell you, he made the dog. I mean, he was on that was a good day. He was on his game that day. Let me tell
Yes, I've got my beloved dog too. Yes, absolutely. So, Gary, we are just about out of time. Where can people find your book, and what do you have coming up?
All right, so the Ghost Crimes trilogy is out now. It's available on Kindle, a paperback, and also on Audible now. So you can go to Audible and get Ghost Crimes 3 as well for the whole trilogy. Book 4, I already have the idea, so it'll be a trilogy for a little bit of time. But I'm on Facebook and Instagram at author Gare Allen, and they can go to my website at gareallen.com as well.
Well, Gary, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with me.
Thank you, CL. I appreciate it. Always have a good time with you, and try and navigate that heat and humidity of Nevada, and be safe out there.
Will do. You've been listening to The Gateway, your compass through the magical waters of spirit communication, broadcast from United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM, New Orleans. I'm your host, CL Thomas. Thank you for listening. Until next time.